So, welcome to our press conference to mark the publication of the Central Bank's annual report for 2014. And I'm joined this morning by Deputy Governor Stefan Gerlach and Cyril Roux, and by the bank's Chief Operations Officer, Jerry Quinn. The financial context for the Irish economic recovery has improved notably during 2014, guided by its mission of safeguarding stability and protecting consumers. The Central Bank has again focused its efforts to support this improvement and to ensure the resilience of the economy and the financial system. Having emerged from the EU-IMF programme at the end of 2013, the Irish economy displayed continuing recovery during the past year. In the banking sector, progress was also made, with the balance sheets of the banks and their customers gradually being repaired, though challenges remain, particularly around longer-term loan arrears. Central Bank once again took significant steps to ensure the resilience and stability of the recovery, not least in regard to the soundness of the banking system. Now, on the banking system, the establishment of the Single Supervisory Mechanism, the SSM, which became operational in November 2014, has transferred the final responsibility for the prudential supervision of the main banks to this new institutional arrangement within the euro area-wide institution, in which the bank, of course, fully participates, and for which, indeed, the bank still provides the backbone of supervisory activity. And Cyril is an ex officio, a member of the supervisory board of the SSM, so dealing not just with Ireland but also with the other euro area countries' banks. In preparation for the start of the SSM, the Irish banks participated in a comprehensive Eurosystem risk assessment, which was carried out by the bank, and the results of which confirmed the lasting strength of the asset quality reviews previously conducted by the bank in 2011 and 2013. In response to this major change in the approach to supervision in Europe, the bank's resources for the supervision of banks were extensively reorganised during 2014. That was quite a big and challenging operation. I think we've moved into a better space with it. A key policy objective of the bank during 2014 was to avoid, in the recovery, the risk of bank credit and house price spirals from developing. To address this, the bank enhanced its Macro-Prudential Policy framework. An overview of this policy framework was published, describing the aims, legal powers available to the bank to address systemic risk in the banking sector. And then a public consultation was undertaken, as you will remember, on specific macro-prudential policy measures for residential mortgage lending. And early in 2015, new regulations were introduced which apply what called proportionate limits to mortgage lending by regulated financial service providers in the Irish market. These measures are part of what is needed to ensure a longer-term, stable and well-functioning mortgage lending market in Ireland. The return to profitability of the main banks, which is an essential part of the recovery process of Ireland, has mainly reflected the reduction in loan loss provisioning, as envisaged in the restructuring plans approved by the European Commission DG Comp, that's the Director General of Competition. Interest margins have also improved, despite the lowering of ECB policy rates, which actually tends to have an adverse direct effect on bank profitability due to the prevalence of tracker mortgages. Downward pressure on non-tracker mortgage interest rates, SVRs, has been weak, reflecting the still weak level of competition in this market, though there are developments this morning, of course, as well as the underpricing of risk which prevailed in the past. The bank has been following these developments closely to help ensure that for both banks and non-bank acquirers of mortgage loans, pricing policies are consistent with prudence and with fair practice. The bank continued to engage directly with lenders and take action regarding the elevated levels of mortgage arrears, part of its overall approach to resolving distressed debt. This was done in the context of the protections for borrowers under our consumer protection framework, including in particular the protections contained in the Code of Conduct on Mortgage Arrears. After a slow start, the capacity and approach of the banks for dealing with distressed borrowers has materially improved over the past few years, with a significant shift from relying on short-term forbearance to longer-term sustainable solutions. Notwithstanding the progress, significant bank-specific areas for improvement remain. However, progress is now well established. Looking at the wider economy, as I've mentioned, a sustained recovery is gathering place, broad-based sustained recovery. Employment has been growing steadily, and the rate of unemployment declining markedly. Improving domestic demand and favourable external factors are underscoring the recovery. On the wider European economy, the outlook for economic growth is also more positive, and the Eurosystem's exceptional monetary policy has helped sentiment, and this stance will help bring price inflation back on target. Well, the bank's annual report, which we are launching here this morning, documents the wide range of specific activities undertaken by the bank, which go well beyond the ones that I've highlighted so far this morning. For example, just to pick out a few other ones, ensuring fair treatment of consumers, in designing and implementing ever-increasingly complex European regulation of financial market participants, meeting more demanding international supervisory standards, resolution of certain weak credit unions, and on enforcement. And this all being carried out, I would say, in the face of challenges in a rapidly changing marketplace around the recruitment and retention of the staff we need in order to fully deliver our mandate. And the demanding nature of this and of the many tasks assigned to the bank have led management to reassess the bank's organisational structures with a review to removing barriers to effective and constructive working methods. And this review is expected to lead to considerable improvements over time. Now, annual reports are full of accounts, and the bank is reporting a 2014 financial profit of 2.1 billion euros, which is a record. After retained earnings, 1.7 billion is being paid over to the Exchequer. The unprecedented scale of profits earned in recent years reflects, it actually adds up to, this is my sixth and as you know, final annual report presentation. And over those years, 6 years, profits have totaled 8 billion. So they've been high for the last 6 years. And that reflects several exceptional crisis-related factors and the manner in which they have been handled by the bank. So it is an interesting and potentially neglected feature of people adding up the balance sheet of the impact of the banking crisis. One important element here, which is quite complex to understand, and I won't really attempt to go into the ins and outs of it, Q&A, unless you really want to, is the so-called special portfolio which we acquired after the liquidation of IBRC. Impact of the portfolio on the bank's finances is quite complex, and we have an FAQ which is being made available today to answer some of the questions which we are asked about it. I'm not saying I won't answer questions about it, I'm just saying I hope I don't get into a very complicated discussion. So, over the years I have been repeatedly struck by the professionalism, dedication and unstinting hard work displayed by the staff and management of the bank, both in times of crisis and now of the post-crisis recovery and reform. My thanks goes to them as well as to members of the Central Bank Commission for their support and advice throughout the year. Well, I was going to continue my plan was to continue the press conference and slide in at an appropriate moment in an offhand manner that you wouldn't be seeing me here this time next year. So I don't have a big statement to make, but I have asked the Minister for Finance. I asked him earlier, well, it's last month now, at the beginning of April, to start the process of identifying a successor to take over towards the end of this year, sort of November, December, something like that. I'll be definitely here until the 1st of November. That's all I say about that now, but I guess somebody's going to ask me some questions about it. So anyway, I'm happy. We're all happy to take any questions you might have at this point.
Governor, could you just confirm that there were no personal issues, no row, there's no drama behind your reasoning?
No, absolutely not. No, I'll have been in the job over 6 years at that stage. It is a 7-year term, so I could stay on for another 8 or 9 months after the end of the year, 8.5 months after the end of the year. But I'd long been asking myself, when is the best moment? I'm not getting any younger. I said to the staff this morning, and the only thing that annoyed me about the story coming out yesterday was that I had planned to give a little video to the staff so that I communicate first to them, and then secondly to your good selves, but it didn't work out like that. And I think what I said to them, and I think it sort of summarizes it, is that this is actually a very good time because it's a time of change, a time of transition anyway. We're transitioning. In the economic and financial policy cycle. So we're moving now from the crisis management phase. The crisis management phase is over. If there's another crisis management phase, it'll be in another crisis. And we're very much now into a phase of repair and consolidation and good husbandry, and that's a different type of activity. So it's a different change of gear. And then internally in the central bank, we've had a lot of huge change. We've had a lot of people pulled out of their normal work to deal with crisis-related issues. We've changed a lot. We've changed the whole of banking supervision twice. One, to make it more intrusive and better staffed, and the second time to swing over to exactly the same degree of intrusiveness and professionalism and staffing, if you like, but in a slightly different way of doing business in compliance with the new supervisory manuals. That's in banking supervision, and we've been staffing up in all of the other areas. And then we've been re-examining and examining our ways of working, our principles and behaviours. There's been huge increase in staff numbers, particularly in 2010, 2011, and then absorption of that. We'll need more staff now. So after all those periods of turmoil, it's a period of consolidation and making sure that our structures are right. And that's one of the big things that we're doing now in the organizational restructuring. But that is more an implementation phase. It's not an ideas and policy initiative and change of direction. We're moving very much into an implementation phase in the internal management of the bank. It is a big organization. It requires that kind of detailed attention to implementation, and so it is a new chapter in the management of the bank. So it's a good time to hand over to somebody else who will take that baton and go with it. And then, of course, as I mentioned in my own life cycle, so this is, okay, so I'm not 65, 65 was last October, 66 is next October. You have to do a bit of advance notice. I wanted to give the decision makers, who are the government, room and the opportunity to have whatever process they want. Obviously, that's not my choice, but there's no point in them trying to do something behind closed doors, and how are we going to? So it's better to say, yes, I'm going. They need to find somebody, and they have 6 months or so to do it.
You told Michael Noonan. You said you told Michael Noonan in April. Can we just?
Yeah.
When in April?
Oh God, what date? Oh no, it was. I meant to check the date because I knew somebody would ask me that. It's I think it was in the first week of April. So yeah.
What was his response?
Well, of course, all conversations are privileged. He was surprised. I told him, well, no, I'm not going to be. I said, I'm not going to be. You're not going to be impressed by this, but I'll be 66. He said he wasn't impressed by that, but he was understanding about it.
What are your plans for retirement?
No jobs in mind. I mean, obviously, everybody tells me that, and I can see that's going to be the case. Is time management is even more important when you're inverted commas retired, and I'm sure I'll be busy speaking and writing and so forth. But I don't have any job plans, nor do I imagine that any such plans will emerge.
Do write a detailed account of your time in this job.
There'll be a temptation to do that. As a matter of fact, as you well know, over the last number of years, I have been in speeches, in evidence to parliamentary inquiries. I've been very proactive in trying to make sure that clear understanding of what happened when was there, and I think broadly successful, but a comprehensive, if you want a book length treatment, you're going to have to wait until I retire, but I don't rule it out, but I may write about other things as well, even more interesting.
Can we take it now that you're going that the system, do you see it as fixed, that the chances of another existential crisis happening is over? I mean, can you even say that?
look, I don't want to exaggerate the degree to which the crisis damage has been fixed. A lot of the damage is there. Legacy damage is there. It's there in households. It's there in firms. It's still there in banks. You know, I mean, obviously it's a very positive story, and in the profitability of banks looking good. They all reported their annual reports. PTSB raised shares and so on. So that's a very positive story. But there is a lot of damage, and on all sorts of dimensions, and damage can be repaired and is being repaired. I would like to have seen, as you know, I've said it repeatedly, much more progress on curing mortgage arrears. We have made progress, but the progress has not been as deep or as fast as I would have hoped, but maybe I shouldn't have expected anymore. We know from deep crises, this is one of the deepest in history, that it takes a decade, and you know we're well through a part of a decade, but we're not there yet. But it looks as if that's going to be the sort of duration that we have as well. So now the situation is well on the road to repair, but one of the factors is the heavy indebtedness of all sectors, and heavy indebtedness leads to fragility, and so there is a degree of fragility that wouldn't have been there, you know, in the early 2000s, and which means that management of the economy and management of all these financial things has to be very, very prudent and cautious on all dimensions. So yes, things could re-emerge. I mean, we know this whole institution and many of the departments of state are designed to protect the stability of the economy and ensure a platform on which growth and prosperity and employment can expand. And that's going to be a constant challenge, and it is still, I don't want to say it's fragile, but there's certainly a lot less fragility than there was, but we need to be very cautious in how we move forward. Sure.
If you can share the rave some more over door, will to sauce like offer the William Road go me for trusting of different.
Tá cúpla rud é dhéanaing I gcuí agsúil ach ní dólam gur rudaí tábhachtach iad. Is tactical seachas stratéiseach agus ní dólam gannne si de mór an difriocht in san táchaí tá roin. Bhéin asúil níos mó a bheith críochna ach ní éting é sin dhéanamh. De chuir mé na policy a bheasas a bheith rúnach agus is tólam go bhfuil siad a rúnach ach tógann siad níos fuide ná mar a ceapas.
It's just to do Farlina doing me other the flan and the Duntalchi, the hay, apart from
Ní léon plan díreacha a gom tá mé big mé tá mé cuiiseach tíirseach éis na blianta agus tá mé súil le gan bheith tacht isteach ar an luas gach maidin go dtína fi.
You said you might have done a couple of things differently. What precisely are you talking about?
I think a man called Arthur Beasley now. He wouldn't have much Irish. No, I'm only joking. Excuse me, Arthur. I'm just playing for time. All right. One of the things I would have done a little bit differently was, although I can't say that the April, May, when it was March, April of 2010, the way we managed to deal with the NAMA purchases of the banks and the halfway house, we were halfway across a river. We knew what the first NAMA batch of loans cost, and we didn't know what the others. How would we handle that since we didn't know and we still had to keep the banks fully capitalised? We went for one approach there, and personally and in terms of the institution reputationally, it didn't help when that approach proved to be insufficient. Now, if we had gone for the alternative approach, which was to say, well, the NAMA say it's going to be X% of a haircut, but it might be much more. So we're going to force the banks to have 20 billion more of capital put into them. If we'd said that at that moment, it would have triggered an immediate program in April. So you want the program in April, or you want the program in November. So that's why I said to Ryan Gaelka that I don't think it made any difference for the long-term future. But it slightly damaged my own reputation in international circles, and they say, you got it wrong. So I say, okay, I got it wrong, but if I got it right, it wouldn't have been any better. So, but that's a small detail. And obviously, there's always a danger to focus on the negatives. That's my approach. That's what makes me an appropriate person for this position, because you want to look at the downside always, the negatives, because the rest of the people out there are looking for the opportunities and positives. We must look for the potential negatives. We're always looking for the downside and guarding against it.
So what kind of qualities would you think your successor should have?
A beard, I think, is essential. Or a skirt.
Well, Governor, can I ask you for your views on your former colleagues, Jean-Claude Trichet's performance yesterday?
Yeah, so I was there at lunch, and I saw some of the people in the hall afterwards, and I had to go to something else, but nobody would believe that. But it's actually true. There was something that a lot of people were there, and I had to be there. And I said, well, sure, there's no point in me being there. It's not my story, it's his story. And I met him at dinner afterwards. So I didn't hear the whole thing, okay? Obviously, why didn't you ask me a more specific question? I don't have I thought it was great that he came.
Did you see the interview last night, for instance?
No, I didn't. But I saw some of the video, so I have a general idea of what it is. I thought it was great that he came. I thought it was very important. I know there was the ECB lawyers, and they're right technically, and they have to maintain this. Europe is a complicated structure, but he wanted to tell his story. And I think the Irish people wanted to hear his story, and I think it was a great day, if you like, for Irish democracy and for Irish engagement with relevant public officials. This is an extraordinary event for Ireland. This is like a one-in-a-century event in our relations with Europe. And although he doesn't have to come up before a parliamentary inquiry or anything like that, it is, I think, very useful for him to communicate in an open way. And with enormous energy, it's impressive that he could spend so long answering the questions. And I think he gave his presentation of what concerns he had and how he saw the best route forward. And I think one thing that probably came home to people, but certainly has been my constant view of him, is that he is and has always been a friend of Ireland. He's been a bit demonised in blogs and stuff. He's been a friend of Ireland. Now, that doesn't mean I agreed at every step with all of the things that he said. I didn't. Of course I didn't. But he did so very much in the best interests of Ireland and the best interests of Europe. And I think when he says that, he is completely sincere. He was never in the position of saying, I don't care about this country or that country. So.
But do you think there are still, from what you know of what he said yesterday, do you think there are still ambiguities there as to how directive the ECB was?
No. Well, first of all, there may be in the minds of people, as Sean asked to write a book and so on and so forth, it's very, the questioning that has been happening around, it's very staccato, and you're jumping from 2008 to 2010 to 2000, and I can't follow it all because I know all those things, but it's very difficult for outside observers to track all those twists and turns, and I probably have thought about them and dwelt on them more than many others. There's no ambiguity in my mind about any of the sequence of events, certainly around the bailout, which I was participating in. The earlier things I wasn't. I just, I got information from other people. And I wouldn't like to go into any elaboration now. I don't think that would just cause greater confusion, but there will be an opportunity. I'm attending the banking inquiry on this topic on June, I think the date is June the 27th. And that will be an ideal time to address any confusions or parts of the story that don't seem to be clear to people.
When you say there's no ambiguity in your mind, do you accept absolutely his record that there were no direct contacts between him and the Irish government at the time?
I mean, I think he's now. This is exactly the sort of precise question. He sent letters. There was. You see, we're talking. What date are we talking about? I don't disagree with anything he said, and I remember a lot of stuff around that time. I might remember a bit more than he remembers, in the sense of what happened at this meeting and that meeting. But I'm not disagreeing with anything he said. No, absolutely not. No.
Governor, I mean, you're obviously here for a few more months. And
Yes, I have work to do.
Ending in your role at the ECB, it's going to be a crucial few months when it comes to Greece.
Yeah.
Just on Greece, do you think the Eurozone is robust enough to withstand potential Greek default? Or do you have any views in terms of how long liquidity assistance should be provided to the Greek banks?
I'm so people claim that I'm a pessimist, but I'm actually slightly optimistic that there'll be an outcome that's good and favourable on this. So I don't like to I do like to consider, but I don't like to talk about any alternatives. So I actually do think on balance but I'm not close enough to the discussions to be an authoritative form of opinion on outcome over the next short period of time that would move us forward for another period of months or years.
In the event of a default by Greece on any of its debts, would it be possible for the country to stay in the single currency?
I'm just laughing not because the question is complex, but the question is in a way misphrased actually, because these are not the alternatives. But
There are people who argue that Greece has an extraordinarily large amount of debt to repay or roll over or refinance this year. There are concerns that the country is not going to be able to make those repayments. The stock response is that, well, if the country defaults on those debts, well, it's simply not going to be able to stay in the Eurozone.
So I'm not going to make a stock response, and I'm not going to make an elaboration of some interpretation of what might happen in hypothetical circumstances. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, may I phrase it another way? Would the door be closed on Greece's Euro membership if it defaults?
There is no mechanism for a euro exit. That's what I understand.
You're effectively leaving your post 10 months early. What triggered your decision?
Well, there was no trigger. As a matter of fact, there was a long period of preparation in the sense that as the crisis abated, it seemed possible for me to at last think in terms of moving into retirement. So there's no short-term trigger. It was really rather saying, well, should I do something last autumn, or there are a few other things to be done, and so those things. So as I say, it's a period of transition. A lot of the policies, all of the policies that I can think of that are likely to be effective and safe are put in place, are well on the way, and so it's not a trigger, but a sense of those. That's what I needed to make sure they were in place, and now it's a safe time for me to think in terms of retirement.
Patrick, two quick
So,
questions.
oh, there, yeah.
Two quick questions for me. You'll probably be best remembered for the Northern Ireland in 2010. Jean-Claude Trichet was asked yesterday at the IIEA meeting
Yeah.
whether he had any conversation with you for you to go on
Yeah.
national
He did,
radio.
yeah.
And morning you may have heard it. Can you
Yeah.
clarify whether he did or not first of
He
all?
no, he didn't tell me to go on. No, certainly not.
And then secondly, in relation to the spring statement earlier this week, it's been suggested by some that it's back to auction politics and giving away 1.5 billion figures. Given the fact you're saying that Ireland's economy is still fragile, or less fragile than it was, but we have to be cautious, is that a wise decision by the way?
Look, the spring statement is in the context of projecting revenue flows, projecting the economy, and projecting a path for the fiscal account that will be consistent with a very elaborate structure of European structure of discipline on the fiscal accounts. So I think it's that in that context that it should be read. The fiscal. Of course, if the government were going off the rails entirely, we wouldn't be slow to jump up and down in this building. The Fiscal Advisory Council, I think, are the go-to people for fine-tune and for detailed analysis, independent analysis of the government's fiscal programme. So I don't want to, apart from the fact that we have a view in the House about we have our own forecast, maybe slightly different, which is normal. So I think there's no message, I think, and maybe Stefan would have a different view. There's no message that we want to deliver on this at this stage.
But do you have any concern at all about the plan as set out? The government is saying in advance of a budget which won't be delivered for another 5 months, but that there is already a firm leeway in the order of 1.2 billion in the final budget before the election, and possibly as much as 1.5. Is that a matter of concern at all?
Well, my gut reaction about this is that the way this has come out in the spring statement, first of all, it's very orderly. Many other countries do it in a very systematic way, early in the year, not late in the year. Surprise, we have this amount of money. And I think into an election period, I think this does put, it may not be a very strict discipline, but it's a degree of structure which, as there are always people worry about whether a government, not this government, but governments might respond to electoral cycles in a particular way, and having this kind of announcement at this stage, I think puts a bit of structure on it. So I'm not sure that we should be particularly worried about that idea of framing it in that way. I'm not, that's a different question to the question, what would be the deficit that the central bank would do if it happened to be the government? Well, it's not the government, so we won't make a statement about that.
Given that
Did
banks,
these governments have your profit figures when they did their numbers for the spring statements, because they had factored in revenues from the central bank? But I'm not sure whether they have 2.1 billion in there. And also, could you just tell us a little bit more about this sale of the bonds?
Yeah.
Was 1 billion profit on that? And if so, why don't you sell all of them?
Yeah, there's a little office there, and if you have a bid, you can. Okay, well, I'm sure the government had those numbers in the spring statement, but let me make one point about that, which is a little bit technical, but useful. They can't. They've got targets for their deficit, and of course for the debt levels as well. But the deficit is not really affected by anymore by capital gains that we might make on bond sales. They do go to reduce the government's debt, but in the deficit, which is a current income, current expenditure, they don't affect that, and that's because of a new approach to the definition of government statistics. So although it would have affected the projections of debt, it couldn't have affected their projections of deficit, which is probably the most central one for what leeway there is for spending and tax changes. Now, we've quietly sold. If you recall, after the IBRC liquidation in February 2013, the central bank acquired a large portfolio of bonds I think it was about 42 billion, corresponding to the amount of ELA, which was, I'm speaking loosely now, and there's more specifics in the facts, the ELA that had been outstanding to IBRC at that time. Some of those were NAMA bonds, and they represented the loan portfolio of IBRC in liquidation. And as that loan portfolio has been sold off by the liquidator, we have actually recovered all of the NAMA bonds that were issued to the central bank as part of this complicated financial engineering transaction. So that's all been repaid. So from the 42 billion, we've had 12 billion of NAMA bonds repaid. The other two big items in that portfolio that we received were 25 billion of floating rate notes, long-term floating rate notes with an average maturity of 34 point something years, and a block of 3.5 billion of fixed rate bonds dated 2025, so they're called the 2025 bonds. So as you will recall, at that time we announced that we would sell this portfolio, dispose of this portfolio as quickly as possible, and subject to financial stability conditions, and there was also a minimum schedule. Now, financial conditions, of course, have improved very markedly in the interim, both in terms of pricing and in terms of stability, though, as I said before, we need to be cautious, and there is the potential fragility is still out there, so we're guided by that in our disposal schedule. But we were able to dispose without any difficulty and without any disturbance or any problem of all of the, basically all, and this is some news for you here, all of the 2025 bonds, the 3.5 billion. In the annual report, it states that that we disposed of a certain amount, I can't remember, 2.8 billion between 2013 and 2014, but I'm here today to tell you that they're all gone. So we disposed of all of those. And for the floating rate notes, we disposed of 500 million of those in December of 2014. We disposed of those by means of selling them back to the NTMA. Floating rate notes of such a maturity are not all that widely traded in the market, so it's easier, I think, for everybody concerned to do it like that. We sell the bonds back to the NTMA. They give us cash. And then to get the cash, they've got plenty of cash at the moment, but they go out into the market to get the cash. That's the mechanism works. That they sell what they think they'd like. They'd like to have a certain mix of bonds in the market from their debt management point of view. So they issue whatever they want to, and as you saw, they're issuing a quite long term nowadays. But those transactions all lead to very, very large capital gains, and so that's why it comes to that 1 billion number that you talked about, part of our profit.
That would be the 2025s, would it?
Yeah, but there's a bit in the 500 million, whatever it is, 500 million, that had a appreciable capital gain in that as well. But anyway, there's more about that in the FAQs.
So what is the net impact of the acceleration in the disposal of this debt? What's the net impact from the perspective of the state's national finances?
Yes, and I can't overemphasize the fact that the central bank its job is to, in this regard, and its plan in this regard is to dispose of the assets as soon as possible, subject to financial stability conditions. But it is of interest to know what is the net effect, and of course the whole environment of that has changed. The FAQs will help understand that, but that's why I really it's really a matter for other observers. If I start telling you here, I think this person will benefit from it and that person will benefit from it, I think maybe to take me away from my mandate a bit.
No, but sure. But
yeah.
You said these capital gains do not have an impact on the deficit.
No, but they do have on the debt.
On the debt, yeah.
Yes.
So what's the net reduction of debt arising from this acceleration of disposal?
Well, I mean, that order of 1 billion right there, and many more to come. Because if you look at the one element here, I know that not all of you will have read every table in the annual report, but there is a table there which shows the unrealized capital gain. So if you marked these floating rate notes to the market-based model that will be relevant for the pricing, you get a figure of 9 billion. That's the one that's in the annual report. 9 billion of unrealized capital gains. So gradually over time, and this will be for not in my time, but gradually over time, there will be these transactions. Now, at current prices, that I'm not promising that it'll be 9 billion. So Sean asked, am I going to sell them all, and would I get 9 billion in profit from them? No. Well, I don't know, but I'm not planning to sell them all. Actually, that unrealized capital gain, if we measured it at yesterday's value, is 12.6 billion. So that's because the interest rates have come down since then and the spreads on Irish government bonds. So that's in a way, in some sense, the potential for future benefits from this one way or the other.
80% of that transfers to the exchequer.
80% transfers right away in the following year. And of course the other 20% is accumulated as reserves of the central bank, which ultimately is owned by the state as well. So yeah.
But the state in its own discretion could use that 80% transfer to reduce debt.
It will have a sort of semi-mechanical reduction in debt. Yeah.
Given the present market conditions are so favourable and the interest rates are so low, does the central bank propose to continue the acceleration in the disposal of this debt this year?
What I would say in regard to that is that the central bank remains committed to selling the bonds as soon as possible, subject to financial stability conditions.
Governor, Michael Noonan asked you to go off and look at the standard variable rates and see if the banks are fleecing their customers. What has your research told you?
So, what an interesting question he asked. And so we actually, strange to relate, this has been a matter of continuous attention by ourselves. And we have actually published a certain amount of research over the past number of years as we've been tracking the evolution. In years gone by, before the crisis and before we had our own domestic banking pressures and all the rest of it, and when tracker rates corresponded to the cost of funds of banks, the standard variable rates moved up and down with the policy rate. That was then, and this is now, and we have to understand a much more complicated environment now. So we have been doing a lot of research. We're doing research on elements of the pricing. We've been doing research on the role of competition in influencing pricing. We've been doing research on the characteristics of borrowers and of the loans. And we've been examining the question of the transparency of the bank's pricing policies on these things. So I'd say that would probably cover the areas which we've been looking at. And so this is an ongoing process, and we'll continue to work on this over a period of time. But we will very shortly produce a summary note which gives information about our present understanding of these issues, but that will be very shortly, and I don't want to go into any further details on it.
What's your sense, though? Could they afford a cut?
Sorry, would you favour any move to compel the banks to reduce the rates?
Well, I've already said a few times, not today, sorry, but in the past, I haven't changed my view on that. I know. I don't know of any successful economy these days. Maybe go turn your clock back 50 years is a different matter, but I don't know any successful economy these days that attempts to have administrative regulation of retail interest rates, and I think I know why. I think that it chokes off competition. We don't have enough competition in the banking system now. I think we will have more competition in the future. These are long-term contracts. I think it's more important both for now and for the future to have the overall regime right and not having somebody poking around and saying do this, do that, because you may end up in a situation where you've driven away the potential competitors and you're left with progressively high cost poor services for customers. So that continues to be my view on that matter.
Governor, a few questions. But 2 years ago, there's kind of on a story to block some stockbrokers and the demise of the stockbroking company.
Yeah.
Our story said that there was an investigation by the central bank. A report was underway. The bank denied that story at the time and denied it after it was published. We've confirmed with Irish Times this morning that indeed an investigation has been ongoing. A few questions out of that. One is, can we trust that the central bank is transparent about its activities, particularly when dealing with the press? And secondly, where is this report? Why is the delay? When is it
Okay.
published?
I don't know whether Cyril has any detail on this. One of the problems of being 65 is my memory is not good enough to recall these. I certainly remember blocks. What do I remember about it? Very little to be able to give you a lot of detail on it. I would say just two things about it. Well, first of all, I hope you can trust the central bank to give proper answers to these things. When it comes to investigations and inquiries and that, we are very much constrained by law. We operate according to law. If we didn't operate according to law, we have nothing. We have to operate in accordance with the law. We're set up under the law. And the law does restrict the degree to which we can communicate about investigations. So that's a general point. I'm not talking specifically about Bloxham's. I'm not aware of any of this conflict you're suggesting between what we said at one time and what we said another. I'm not disputing it, but I'm not just at the moment aware of it. But that is rising in a number of other issues. Just because you don't hear anything from the central bank doesn't mean we aren't rumbling around in the background. And some things take a long, long time to come to the point where we've decided, yes, we have a problem. We're now going to do something about it. Now, all of what I'm saying is not speaking to the Bloxham's case because I can't remember. Do you have any recollection? This was before your time, but you may have.
I can just confirm that indeed these investigations in general take a lot of time, especially when people are involved, and we do communicate when we can, which is at the end of the process when there's a settlement or when we go to court. And at this stage we go public, which actually the firms don't like, but we do communicate when we can and not before we can.
Can you give any time frame as to when we can expect? 3 years this report
We'll provide some information if any, whatever information is available, we'll provide it later in the day. I just don't have it to hand.
So, Governor, can I just, apologies for coming back a bit earlier on Greece. So you're slightly more optimistic now about a solution to the Greek problem? Have you become more optimistic of late?
Slightly. Is that enough?
Why are you more optimistic? Why are you slightly more?
No, just from observing somewhat at a distance the negotiating process, I've become slightly more optimistic in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Governor, the reporting and the disclosure of documents relating to the sale of side serving said that deal was referred to the central bank and nothing more was heard.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Okay, all right. I'm going to play this with a very straight bat. I will just say, so I'm just going to make sure that I get all the words right. This is exactly in the same sort of category. This column is mentioning that we have to be very careful. Because some of this is, I can't say, for whatever reason. Can't remember.
This is what you can say.
This is what I can say. Oh, not this! I can't say this. It's high intensity. You know, it's quite serious, actually. I don't know what I think I could say. Actually, there's not all that much here to be anyway. Don't be trying to enlarge following the receipt of specific allegations. So there were specific allegations. Central Bank investigated this transaction. No attempt was made to try to second-guess commercial decisions taken by the bank. So that means, didn't say, oh, should they have got 50 million or should they only have got 40 million or that. Instead, the central bank's work focused on reviewing the robustness and integrity of IBRC governance processes and controls. We consider the matter closed, and in the absence of any new information, no further action is pending. Central Bank, as part of its ongoing supervision of IBRC, like other institutions, also completed on-site credit inspections, and any issues identified during the course of our supervisory engagement with IBRC would have been followed up as part of our normal supervisory processes. This whole business of debt recovery and banks sorting their is new territory for the banks, and new territory for all of the banks. IBRC had a new team. Other banks had new ways of working. I don't think it's surprising that people can raise issues about it, and we certainly were monitoring for all the banks their supervisory processes around this, and we had issues with all of the banks, and we pushed back to all of the banks on you should do more of this, do more of that. So on this, the only thing I'd add to this is that since specific question raised to me, this matter was handled at. I don't know anything about this because the first information I have about it internally is in the last number of days, because such an allegation, which I welcome such allegations if they're well founded, if people are worried, please send them in. It was handled at an appropriately senior level and was dealt with at that level. So we don't get involved, look, there's this transaction, this well-known purchaser and this well-known sale, and want to talk to Cyril and see what he thinks. This is handled professionally at the appropriate level. We stay out of the particular transactions.
Could you set out the nature of the allegations, from whom it was received, and whether the fact that the bank chose to conduct a review can be taken as an inference that the bank believed at a prima facie level that there was something to the allegation that should be investigated?
I don't think I can say any of those things, but I think what it does indicate is that the bank takes allegations very seriously, and it's an important source of information. Market intelligence or direct contact from people is an important source of information for a supervisor, and we should have and do have our antennae tuned for that. Now, vague allegations are no use, but specific allegations can be followed up and are followed up.
Was this the only IBRC transaction you investigated, or were there more from IBRC?
Do we have? I think.
Well, what I can say is that we looked more generally, as we do for a number of institutions. We looked at the procedures and policies in credit and distressed credit, and whether the operations around distressed credit followed best practice or the internal policies of the bank. So, as a matter of course.
But were there any more allegations about IBRC transactions other than the one you investigated?
Well,
go ahead.
And going slightly back to the earlier question, we have a whistleblower policy, right? So when you ask for the name of people making allegations, where there are protections under law for people making, whistleblowing. And as far as when we receive whistleblowing, it goes into a dedicated office that triage the allegation on the basis of whether it seems there is evidence given, there's reasons to believe there's something behind it. So it's all triage, and then when it is a triage, it's given to banking supervision or to enforcement to look into it. So, we're not going to go today into opening up the whistleblowing file of this bank or that bank and telling you how many were triaged up and down and parked. I don't think that would be appropriate.
The bottom line is there was an investigation in relation to the specific site-serve transaction. Was there any other investigation by the central bank in relation to other transactions at the level of IB or C, other specific transactions?
I'm not going to answer any questions about that, because the next question after that will be, and what about another bank? And our processes, we have to protect our processes. It's very important. We're in a freedom of information environment. That's true, but we have to. For example, if there are international regulators, we have relations with international regulators. We operate on the basis of trust, that what we tell them will help them, but they're not going to bring it out into a public arena. Likewise here. So that's one of the reasons we have to be very careful about foreign regulators saying, why are the central banks seem to be speaking very loosely about this or that? So we want to be very, very careful about this whole thing about investigation.
Can I just on just on the mortgage interest or the standard variable rates again? Obviously you're doing this piece of work, but the finance minister said during the week that he's going to ask the banks to cut their rates, and he expects them to follow that recommendation. I mean, would you be worried about the independence of the banks when the minister's sort of saying, language that's pretty strong like that?
I mean, there's independence and independence. I mean, he doesn't own all the banks. First of all, he's a moderate shareholder in Bank of Ireland and so forth, and he has relationship. What do they call them? Agreements with the other banks that he's majority shareholder in. I mean, I don't imagine he's going to, in some kind of covert way, put concrete pressure on them to do something that's not a good idea. We're all in the space of, including, as far as I understand, the government, in the space of wanting the banks to return out of public ownership as soon as possible, so that there'd be no problem of mixing between the commercial mandate of the banks and any kind of other mandate.
Could I go right back to the start, Governor? How would you characterise your relationship with Mr. Noonan and with the department over the last couple of years?
Well, I think it's very good, actually. I think our relationship with the Department of Finance and, of course, with the Minister works very well. We work. Cyril and Stefan and myself attend on a monthly basis now. It used to be more frequent when things were more urgent. A joint meeting with the Department of Finance senior officials and with the NTMA, and we thrash out any financial stability issues that are arising, and that gives us a good basis for any other issues that might not be financial stability issues that might come up. So I personally have very good working relations, I would say. You can ask them; they mightn't think so. But with the top officials of the Department of Finance, and travel out with them to international meetings in Washington and there last week in Riga. So I think it's a very easy income. That doesn't mean that they don't write letters to us saying, why don't you do this and that, and we say, we're not going to do that, or vice versa. So, but that's business. It would be terrible if we agreed on everything, and we don't.
You are an academic originally, and yet you've taken on this job, which is very much kind of a real-world, real-time kind of a job, at a time of great strain in global finance and the national situation. Do you have any observations as to what you've experienced in this job vis-a-vis your outlook honed in years and years of academia?
To some extent, there have been few surprises, because from the time, it's not too much, that was the last job I had with academia, but I was in very much policy research arena in international organizations and so forth in the SRI. So I'd seen a lot of things that can go wrong, and they went wrong in very similar ways. So what I liked as an academic, of course, I used to do regressions and things like that, which is abstract, but getting into the nuts and bolts of exactly what went wrong, and reading historical analyses of who said what to whom, and so it was like coming into a real live history book here. Not too much surprising. Lots of people say, "Oh, this must be a terribly stressful job," but actually, decisions are decisions, and there's a best decision and a less good decision. And yes, sure, the stakes are enormously high for the country, but sometimes little issues can worry people just as much as big issues. And I know people complain maybe a bit that I try to make light of things, but I've always been acutely aware of the fact that in this period of time, central banking financial regulation, the stakes are enormously high, and mistakes could have been enormously costly. And I think we managed to manoeuvre, thanks to the experience of what can be done and what should be done. We might not have got everything we wanted done right, but we did, I think, we avoided false steps.